for you guys and for me. My name is Yunosov. I'm a security researcher in Positive Technologies, and today I will talk a little bit about transaction stream fraud. So that's what we've been doing in the last few years, so as well as actual hackers. So transaction stream fraud is certain group of manipulations where hackers will be able to withdraw money from cards by bypassing some security measures, either on the point of sale side, so within the communications between point of sale and card, or further on the authorization processes. So the main question that we follow normally over the last several years, regardless of whether we are doing card assessment or just any banking assessment, is very simple. Where is the money? Yeah, because whenever you'll find out where is the money, that will mean that something went wrong in the systems you were trying to assess. And that is essentially the difference between good pen tester and bad pen tester. Good pen test, bad pen test, yeah. So bad pen testers, they don't know how to get money out. Next question you need to answer is who you are trying to simulate stealing money from. So you can either simulate stealing money out of the bank fundings themselves, yeah, or method which we use very often is to open two accounts, yeah, and try to simulate stealing money out of each other. So we normally just go and open two banking accounts and I try to steal money from my colleague and vice versa. And that's how last year we have decided to open some accounts in European banks, and we've decided not to choose high street banks because they are too big. They are essentially very inflexible. It's really hard to change anything in there, and they probably fraud is something they worry in the very last minute about. Yeah, we've decided to follow companies as they're called fintech startups or bank disruptors. Yeah, some brand fancy applications, essentially no offices, no branches, only mobile app, even no online banking systems, traditional one. And to have a look at them. So that's how we have opened two accounts in 2018, and things were going so good that we opened another 8 accounts later in 2019. And let's see how things went there. So just a little bit of background for people who forgot or who never known. Yeah. Just a regular payment process. You have some payment instruments such as card or mobile wallet, so everything except cash essentially. Then you will have some payment endpoint, as we call it. It can be point of sale, cash register, ATM, some online acquiring services which allow you to pay on the internet. Then things will go to the acquiring bank, which is responsible for merchants, and via specific networks such as Visa or MasterCard, information will be passed to your issuing bank. And issuing bank essentially has a big infrastructure, and one point of this infrastructure is authorization hosts, which will be able to decide whether your transaction is good, and issuing bank will say that you have enough funds on your account and they are happy to confirm your transaction, or will say declined for certain reasons, and transaction will be declined, and this information will be sent all the way back, and you will basically see the successful or declined result on the screen. And talking about payment endpoints, yeah, as I said, you have like several options. You have ATMs, you have point of sales, some online services. Some of them, all of them, they have their own pros and cons. For example, ATMs, they are too big. You will never want to bring ATM on your card assessment project whatsoever. And honestly, we've been talking about ATMs for too long, so we've done presentation at Black Hat Vegas last year about breaking black box in modern ATMs. We had BBC who were filming us making fun with different ATMs, and not too many things now we can say, to be honest. Yeah, and that's why we have decided to switch to these little fellas. So they are essentially either traditional point of sale on the right or mobile point of sale made by PayPal on the left. And as you can spot out, probably they both are not as just a regular point of sale. So the difference is that they both have remote code execution on them. So on the left, we were able to run some funny cat. On the right, there is not enough pixels to make a cat face. And we've done it with the help of our colleagues, and the idea is that point of sale which has remote code execution on it is an extremely useful instrument which allows you to get many things. So first of all, you'll be able to see the real implementation of EMV and NFC core. So instead of reading thousands of pages of EMV specifications, you can just get access to the device and see assembler code, which will follow up exactly the same workflows. Even at this point, you can find some sort of vulnerabilities such as overflows via NFC, EMV, which are extremely rare because it's really hard to find them via black box, so you need to get access to the software on the terminal side in order to find such vulnerabilities. And next step is you basically, once you get access to the terminal, you can follow up the full payment process, payment workflow. So you can have a look at how payment packet looks in general. They are called packet 55 in banks. Banking terminology. You can have a look at different configuration files such as limits, different configs for different types of transactions, different type of cards and vendors, and follow up the main security measure within point of sale during the payment process, which is called offline data authentication. So that is an example. And even if you, for example, don't have remote code execution on point of sale, you can't buy point of sale connected to the merchant network, sometimes acquiring network, sometimes it's, well, most of the time it's, that's the case. There is an interesting thing which is called MasterCard Terminal Simulator. So this is a free software which you can download. It's made on the JavaScript, and it allows you to simulate both merchant, so point of sale terminal, and authorization on the acquiring side. So all you need after that is just to connect your card reader, either chip card reader or NFC card reader, and you will be able to simulate payments. So that is how payment packet looks, just very briefly. So they are encoded with, as it's called, TLV, tag length value. So you have tags and big database of EMV tags, which you can find online. And you will have the length of each tags and the value itself, and they are sort of nested one into each other, so you have this sort of tree of different tags within the payment processes. So what interesting you can find at this stage of the payment packet? So you have things like card number, track to equivalent, expiry date, transaction date and time, amount, obviously, and currency of the transaction that was made, type of operation, so it can be just a regular payment, can be cashback, refund, and type of the cryptogram that was made during the payment process, if there were any of payment cryptogram, and type of cardholder verification, so it could be chip or it could be PIN or signature or no cardholder verification at all. So let's talk briefly about the attacks. Yeah, so we're gonna talk about refund and reversal attacks. Then we'll talk about card testing, rounding, attacks on chip and PIN, and briefly we'll follow up NFC attacks, but not too much. So reverse attacks, quite interesting case that take place in 2016 when so the story was that guys came to ATM, withdraw like £100, $100. Then they have taken authorization code from the ATM receipt and used their own compromised point-of-sale terminal, maybe such as one that I've shown you before, and send a special reversal request saying to the bank that this operation was cancelled and it should be reversed and money should return back to the account. And that made people whose account were like $100 at all, they were able to withdraw like multiple times this money from account which obviously didn't exist. Yeah, the problem is that that's not how normally reversal transactions work. So when ATM sends a reversal transaction request to the issuing bank, it needs to send one additional piece of information which point of sale don't even have. So special code which should be enough with the authorization code to finalize the reversal process. However, there were multiple banks, predominantly in Eastern Europe, who didn't check this field, and that within probably some of insiders' information allowed hackers to bypass this measure and steal what, like $4 million? Next is just a pure refund attacks, yeah? So for this attack you don't need ATMs, you don't need any vulnerable software. So what do? You do just a regular purchase, for example, from a credit card on your point of sale, and then you initiate the refund. So to initiate refund, there is no checks on the point of sale itself. So, and merchant can't basically say, oh, you need to return money only on the card that you've issued and made payment with, because obviously you can lose this card, it can't be a mobile wallet, anything like that. So these checks, they are normally made on the issuing side of the bank, or on the acquiring side of the bank. And sometimes they obviously are not checking up correctly. And what's going on next? So you do refund on the debit card instead of credit card, and what happens? Well, first of all, this is purely called just money movements or money laundering. Yeah, so you try to send money from, I don't know, cards that you have stolen from a dark market to the cards that are essentially belong to hackers. Next is hackers will allow to get sort of free infinite credit line. Yeah, so imagine to yourself, you normally have, for example, at the end of the month, you have $1,000 debit. You need to return $1,000 to your bank. What you do is you just initiate transaction for another $1,000 and return it back to the debit card, and then send money from a debit card back to the credit card. And the thing is that this 1,000 that you've spent a minute ago, you won't need to return next day. Yeah, your money will be set up for next 30 days or for next two months, for example, depends on the bank's requirements and your agreements. Yeah, and what you obviously will do, you will just do this essentially every month, every couple of months, and you still will owe money to these banks, such as 1,000, but you won't need to cover any fees and charges. And next thing is that because it's a credit card, in most of cases, for any payments you will get, as it's called, some cash back, some sort of reward for this payment, but money will go back and you basically haven't spent anything. And because you initiated refund, even the acquiring bank won't ask for any commissions for this transaction. So another thing is card testing. Card testing is extremely popular attack in the last few years, since maybe 2015, both used for balance testing and for just valid cards testing. Yeah, so for example, a couple of things that happened in the last few months. There was a Magenta content management system that contained vulnerable PayPal plugin, which allowed basically to add any card you want without any limits, and that's how hackers were trying to enumerate valid and invalid cards, and whenever card was valid, obviously website answered that card is successfully added to PayPal. That is basically how it happens, for example, in Google Pay as well. Although Google Pay has limits for like 10 attempts, yeah? So whenever you add card which is valid, which has valid card number, expiry date, and CVV, you will get a temp of withdrawal of £0, yeah, and system will say your card has successfully been added. And if card has wrong CVV or expiry date or card number, you will get error message and you'll be able to separate valid cards from invalid cards. And once this step is over, you can also try to increasingly withdraw more and more money from accounts. So I've left on purpose my card number on the internet like for a couple months, and in less than 2-3 weeks I started to receive these attempts of withdrawing like $7 first, then someone was trying to steal almost $50 from my account. Obviously card was fully empty, but that was a fun experience. So that attack took place probably like first time in the last decade in 2016, when Tesco Bank from the UK was hit for $2.5 million. So hackers have stolen 40,000 accounts. They were able to brute force 40,000 accounts, and they have done almost 10,000 successful transactions. Yeah, so that was the case when no one actually known what's been going on. So when Tesco said, yeah, like Tesco did not use the H word in any statement and interviews, so they were not actually known that they were hacked. A couple of months later, guys from Newcastle University came up with the research where they sort of highlighted what actually has happened. And that was essentially sort of consecutive enumeration of different parts of the card requisites for online payments. So first of all, you have some sort of bin range, which belongs to each bank. In this case, that was Tesco Bank, yeah. Then you, for example, try to enumerate card number, yeah. Just imagine you go to Tesco Bank, you open a bank account, you get a card, and you will have certain number, and there is if bank doesn't have card randomization process, that means that next customer will receive next number on the card, which is valid within next 10 digits due to the special checksum code, and that will also mean that probably this card will have exactly the same expiry date, yeah, because it was issued probably the same day or the next day, or maximum plus 1 month. So then all we need is just to enumerate CVV, and the problem is that there is almost no strict limits for CVV enumeration. For example, if you try to brute force PIN code, you are limited with 3 attempts, yeah. And with CVV, you normally don't have these things, yeah. And by that point, that's enough to get money to monetize your money in some way. For example, Domino Pizza haven't had 3D Secure for very, very long time, and that's why it was used for cashing out money from stolen accounts. Yeah, you know that you all probably know that you don't need to enter 3D Secure when you try to pay for booking or for air tickets. And if you pay offline, if you pay on the payment terminal, for example, in America, you also can enter just your card number, CVV code, and payment will go through. And some places implement things, for example, which are called address verification system, which will ask you to enter your postcode in order to check that you are actually the card holder. But the problem is that this is bound to the country, so if you try to buy things in the US or in Russia, they won't be able to get access to your data if your card is issued somewhere else in Europe or in other places, And just as a last nail in the coffin, just last year, Tesco Bank was fined for another £16 million for that accident that taken place in 2016. They're not doing very well now. So card testing, about this. Both Visa, MasterCard take things extremely serious nowadays. They put it in their security guidelines and white papers that this is thing that is extremely popular in hackers area, especially guys in Latin America, such as Brazil. And last year, for example, Monzo startup was hit by the same attack, but happily they were able to block these attempts. Rounding. One of my favorite vulnerability and one of the oldest one. So first reference I was able to find was 2001. And I've become more familiar with it later in 2013. When I started to work closer with banks. So just to remind you, you have, for example, £1, which is essentially $1.3. If you make payment for $0.02 from your pound account, it will be round for £0.02 because of max of 2 digits after the float point. But in fact, £0.02, if you make the same procedure back, it will be turned to $0.03. And that gives us pure 1 cent profit from those transactions. Are we rich? Well, not yet. You obviously need to repeat this like 10,000 times, for example, to get at least $100, and this the points where problems will start. You can meet some issues with one-time passwords being required. Anti-fraud systems can start to hit you, and no one ever would like to make 10,000 transactions manually. That's why you need to automate it in certain way. There is also strange, but in 2019, all banks that we have checked were prone to this vulnerability and this attack. So that is sort of potentially vulnerable, because what we've done is we've tried once this process. We've got 1 cent of the profit, and we stopped at this point, and there was only one bank that asked us to conduct thousands of transactions in order to check that their anti-fraud system will find us, but essentially didn't find. And that bank confirmed that they are prone to this attack. Coming back to chip and pin. So first reference about chip and pin attack was made in 2011, guys from University of Cambridge, and Adam Laurie, who now carrying out workshop and trainings here on the Cyber Week. And later in 2011, guys from Aperture Lab and where Adam Laurie works, and Inverse Pass, which are now essentially part of F-Secure, made presentation on DEF CON Black Hat about vulnerabilities of PIN transactions, chip transactions. So essentially what they've done is they've shown that hackers can do multiple things. First of all, they can intercept PIN code in a plain text. Then they can make transactions without knowing PIN code at all. This is called a PIN OK attack. That's basically when card says that PIN was correct, even though it wasn't correct. And the third and obvious part is just to downgrade cardholder verification to chip and signature. So chip and signature is US legacy, let's say, mode of dealing with chip transactions, where even though you've made chip transaction, you won't be required to enter PIN. Just all you need is just to do as during a traditional MaxStripe transactions, just leave a signature on the receipt and go away. So what is this all about? So both card and terminal, they have CVM lists, cardholder verification method lists, which has prioritized methods, lists of methods within things like conditions of use of these methods and what will happen if this method will fail. And what's going on that card has its own list, terminal has its own capabilities, terminal checks this list and choose one that makes most of the sense. In just brief overview, that list will look like, we're going to use encrypted PIN if both terminal and card will support it. If no, we'll try to use an encrypted PIN. If no, we'll try to use signature, and if customer will decline this, operation will be cancelled. It is quite good database of CVM lists of cards all around Europe on this SpotterWiki website. Problem is that this list doesn't contain two bits of the information, such as condition of use and what will happen if CVM method is failed. So they only contain just unprioritized CVM method lists. And later I will show you why is this important. These things belong to, as it called, offline data authentication, the process that I've mentioned before. So CVM cardholder verification should be checked during this process. This attack and this research had a little bit different order comparing with last one. So in last one, hackers came first, and then research team came and explained to the audience and to financial markets how they were able to steal money. Here is a little bit different. So in 2011, Adam Laurie and guys from Inverse Pass Aperture Lab presented things on DEF CON Black Hat and in 2010. And in 2011, in France, organized crime have already taken this opportunity approach to steal money from customers. So they have stolen 40 cards from some French bank. And they were able to conduct 7,000 transactions, and they've stolen around 700,000 euros. And they've implemented sort of PIN OK attack with just additional PIN, which was put on top of the original one, So, which was just enough to slide into the point of sale. When we simulate this project, we use a little bit different devices. So we use something like this. This is a big device. You slide card in one part and you use second as a card simulation part. And obviously it is not, you won't try to trick this in front of the cashier on the supermarket, do you? And that's why interesting part is about the requirements of payment. So 2019, this attack should be fully mitigated because of how guys from Inverse Pass quote CVM is signed, because banks after 2011 implemented CDA mode, which allowed to fully mitigate this problem. However, as I said, in Europe in 2019, this attack still can be possible, and we were able to make it work for almost every bank. The problem, there are many problems about that. So first of all, as I said, in CVM lists, they have conditions of use. And conditions of use can say, for example, that online PIN should be used only if point of sale is unattended. Means like it sits in the on the gas station, in McDonald's self-service and things like that, when you actually can use those devices, and don't bring a lot of attention from a cashier. But next rule will say that if it is not unattended device, if you have a cashier in front of you, we can use, for example, offline PIN without any checks where these attacks can take place, and obviously that is probably what those guys have done. Next problem is that even if, for example, both card and terminal support old vulnerable authentication method DDA and less vulnerable method CDA, it's still possible that, first of all, terminal for some reasons will decide not to choose CDA and get transaction through, which will allow to downgrade it to chip and signature or to use PIN-OK attack. And second, if, for example, during some checks, offline authentication will be failed, information will go still to the bank, and bank will have to decide whether they are happy to finalize your transaction or they will cancel it. And that is how NFC came. So NFC was sort of idea of implementing very convenient and useful method of, from the same side, secure EMV transactions. So you have the same features of EMV, such as PIN, and not just a simple magnetic stripe within the idea of proximity that you just tap and go. So EMV is like more than thousands of pages which will describe how secure transactions should be made, and they all explained in EMV core books. Then the problem was that NFC, everyone have decided to build up their own NFC implementation. So Visa came up with their own NFC implementation of EMV specs. MasterCard came up with their own. American Express came with their own. And that created another 1,000+ pages of specifications, and both Visa and MasterCard created their own legacy modes for this transitional period, and vulnerabilities of legacy modes were very well described in work of Peter Filmer on Black Hat and DEF CON in 2015. And as I said, one of the most amazing features of contactless payments is tap and go. So just tap and go away with goods without paying. So tap and go follows the main idea. You have some sort of country limits. In the UK, it is £30. In Europe, it is 30 euros, or some sort of representation of 30 euros within the local currency. And those limits are set on a terminal by merchant or by acquirer. So, for example, merchant can come up to acquirer and say, "Hey, I need a little bit higher limits," and acquirer will say, "Okay, if you take the full responsibility for this, if you want this fraud to take place in your store, go for it." And within these limits, you basically don't need to do any cardholder verification. So customer won't need to present PIN or signature, and it is extremely convenient. At the same time, it caused a lot of problems. So two things. First of all is that those Like, for example, if you get $100 bill, you can ask cashier to split it on multiple transactions. That's normally, you can say, okay, I don't have enough money on one card, can we split it via like multiple cards? And there is no problem from a cashier perspective. At the same time, it doesn't make any sense because that's why no CVM limits were implemented, in order not to prohibit fraudsters to make payments over these things. And also that's why people are really concerned about even the idea of raising up these limits. So over time, obviously because of inflation, because of people's wealth and things like that, a lot of countries say, okay, maybe it's a good idea to raise up a little bit these limits, like to £50 instead of £30. At the same time, last year, amount of contactless fraud in the UK first time hit and overlapped the check scams and was around £5.5 million. That means that if you raise up this bar even a little bit higher, you will get much worse consequences. And therefore, in Europe, PSD2 requirements were implemented. So PSD2 is payment something directive, sorry. And they say exactly how, customer authentication should be made. So what they say is that every 5 transactions or every £150 spent, you will need to present cardholder verification. So you will either be asked to enter PIN or to insert your card and still enter PIN. So the problem that in the UK, you can't make payments over £30 by contactless. You will be asked to insert card and use chip transactions. And this had been implemented in just recently, and implementation should be over by the end of the year. And we tried to have a look at these transactions and these contactless limits just before these security measures were implemented. We were able to successfully bypass this £30 limit, and then PSD2 was implemented, and we were like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Is it possible still to bypass this sort of £150 limit? And we also were able to bypass it, and we'll happily present it later in a black hat in Europe, show how you can clone PIN-only cards, EMV-only cards, I mean, just not just legacy modes. How to clone EMV-only transactions, how to bypass these limits, how to bypass PSD2 requirements, and we will be happy to shake a little bit the payment industry. Interesting thing is that I was sitting on a plane on the way here, and I've seen an advertising of RFID wallets. It's extremely popular now to promote RFID wallets by saying, guys, that's gonna help your contactless cards from fraudsters. But then some security researchers come and say, how it's gonna help, because NFC card don't contain any payment details. It won't have your track-to data. It won't be possible to finalize the transaction with this information. I really even found today, like, oh, NFC technology also uses tokenization to replace the actual card number with unique set of numbers. So can be linked back to the original account information. Well, it's not true. And we'll be happy to show how to clone transactions, how to clone cards. So I would suggest still to use RFID protections. So bottom line, we have now extremely big amount of payment entities, when like 30 years ago, if you make payment, you have acquirer, you have network of card brand, and you have issuer. That's it. Now you have tokenizer, mobile wallet service, some mobile point of sale merchant which sits under the merchant of your payment systems, and many, many other instances. And they all are not even, let's say, yeah, so some of them are a little bit better than others, and it's really hard to understand which are better than others. And coming back to my first question, where is the money? Yeah, to be honest, payment industry don't care where is the money. The main question which risk-based model asks is how much money? How much money you will lose, bank will lose if hackers will start to implement such attacks? How much money we lose? How much money we've lost so far on this attack? Yeah, and banks look at this and see, oh, there's not too much. That means that we can probably just spend all our money, effort, and resources to building up some new features and don't care about security until problems will start to occur. This is sort of strange. So imagine to yourself, you have sort of bug bounty program from some vendor, yeah, like Google or anything like that. You found vulnerability. Yeah, vulnerability can be, for example, even out of scope with like lowest CVSS, some sort of absolutely irrelevant, yeah, and in most of cases you will get thanks, you will get your money on account, and you will be happy, and bank will and Google and other companies will fix them, and that will mean that these vulnerabilities would not be used in the future because they can't be used, yeah. But let's say we talk about banks, yeah, you found some vulnerability which has reasonable CVSS, which has, because you are essentially is able to steal money from someone's account, yeah? It's not been used in the wild, that's what you will get in back. So bank and any other financial institution will answer you, guys, it's not been used in the wild, that's probably why we won't do anything for now and we'll be sitting and waiting until things will become worse. But that means that these vulnerabilities still can be used in the wild, and that will mean that hackers will be able to take advantage of it. We have this amazing resource which is called Card Payments Fail. We will try to accumulate there some knowledge about payments, about some past attacks, about things that we are going to disclose later in the year. So if you have any questions.
You talked a lot about different examples of payment transaction fraud, but you didn't talk about the tools or hardware that you use to analyze the protocol. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Next question. Yeah, we have an amazing reverse engineering team and amazing engineers which were able to reproduce or to come up with some sort of hardware for these attacks. And I'm probably the worst person to discuss these things.
Are there any publicly known tools that a person can use to try to understand how payments work?
Sorry?
Are there any publicly known tools or?
Yeah, so there are several people in the industry who do certain work around payments, who create some hardware, who come up with some bright or not maybe as bright ideas. And yeah, they're basically all available on the internet. You just need to use Google if it's available in your country. So why do banks continue to use such dangerous protocols with zero-knowledge protocols are known for longer? Is it really cheaper for them to implement this type of protocol? This sort of idea of status quo for many, many instances within banks, like banks sit on top of other banks and which sit on top of infrastructures that were made back in like 30 years ago for technologies that were popular extremely maybe 30 years ago. And actually, yeah, there are like in medium-sized bank, like 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people, amount of people who know how things work that I shown today, for example, well, you will hardly find one or two, person who know what and how things work. And maybe they can be hired by the time when systems were started to be implemented, but they also can already leave the company and bank by the time hackers will come up. Given the potential legal implications, how does a person get experience in payment testing or payment research? The question from Ellie. So, we constantly meet some threats of that we are going to go under legal consequences. People will sue us, or we will be sent to prison because of things that we try to uncover. I can say just do bug bounty, guys. Don't get into this field. It's much cheaper and just for your sanity. Given the advances in securing smart cards, can we consider that the payments aren't safe until POS systems are provided with more security? Yeah, that's a good topic. So the idea was that point of sales were essentially the part of trusted environment. Yeah, there are a whole list of point of sales which can be used in the environment because they are not PCI compliant anymore, because they sort of disclose cryptographic keys, etc., etc. But at the same time, there are still devices where we've shown that these things can be done. However, as long as they are PCI compliant, they had this attestation in the past, that means that they can be used. And there is a huge gap in time in technologies when those two things will cross. So you still have a vulnerable device, and although it still can be used and will be used in the environment. Blockchain, next question. Decimal round of vulnerabilities still work? Yes, so decimal round of vulnerabilities, it's just like, as I said, we are going to present some findings about them maybe next year, and if you'll try enough, you can find anything you want. All right, that's it, I guess. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Can we have one more big applause for Tim?